Hello again, I am Blunty, and this is the GALAX Black Hall of Fame Sniper Edition GTX 970, and basically those three sort of additional names it gets mean it's GALAX's way of telling you it's their best of their best of their very best. So this should be one of the best GTX 970s on the planet when it comes to performance. But that's just not the kind of claim I'm prepared to take on face value. So of course we've stuck it in the machine back there. Old Devil's Crevice gets another bash at a 970. So let's see how this thing actually performs in the real world. Actually, before we do that, we should take a look at the physics of the card, you know, the unboxing part before I whacked it in there so you can get a good look at what it looks like. That would make more sense. We'll do that. One of the first things you're met with upon opening the box is another example of one of the most bizarre and inexplicable trends in video card packaging. The attempt at a comedy doorknob hanger thingy. Can someone please explain to me why these are a thing? Anyway, this one was apparently drawn by someone who's pretty good with graphic design, but can't actually draw well enough to impress a 4-year-old. Look at this. Also, there's some weird English grammar going on the back. Overclocking under progress? The weirdest thing about that is they got it right on the other side. Game in progress. I don't know. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out. It's weird. The card itself is a bit of a whopper. Thick and heavy with what they call their Silence Extreme cooler. With some extremely serious heat sinks threaded with no less than 7 nickel-plated heat pipes. You also may notice that the fans aren't quite all the same. There's 2 80mm fans, and the center one is a 90mm fan. And the fan sheath seems to be the only consideration to saving a bit of weight. It's plastic and carries a stealthy black and grey design. The Anodised Aluminium Backplate covers the extended and completely from the ground up custom designed PCB. And that button on the backplate, they call that the Hyper Boost button. Basically what it does is unlock all the power delivery limitations and instantly ramps up the fans to 100%. And we'll come back to that after the performance tests. And it does, of course, have a dual BIOS for the extreme overclockers to tinker with. And lastly, on the physical attributes, you may have spotted the dual 8-pin power lines feeding in. Almost every other GTX 970 on the planet wants one 8-pin and one 6-pin. That's plenty for them. But the Black Hall of Fame Sniper Edition, with its custom-designed power delivery and bulky cooler, is prepared to suck in every last electron possible to churn out performance worthy of naming it 3 times. And I'll come back to just how far all that extra juice let me push the overclock in a minute. But spoiler alert, it was kind of mind-shattering. Wait till you see it. Now, as many of you may know, a stock-clocked GTX 970 is 1050 MHz boosting to 1178. And as you can imagine, a card that comes marketed as the best of the best of the best comes out of the box with a fairly aggressive overclock already in place. 1228 MHz base and 1380 MHz boost clock, which is about what you'll find on many high-end variants of the GTX 970 that come overclocked out of the box. It's a noticeably significant boost over stock clocks, but without pushing things so far that it can't keep itself quiet. So let's play some games. Fallout 4 doesn't make for the best benchmark possible, as its frame rate is capped at 60 FPS even on PC and at 1080p, and unlocking the frame rate manually makes the game physics do stupid things, and the UI doesn't work properly if you push above 1080p, but it's a super popular game and uncountable hours of enjoyment, and people want to know how the card plays on this game, so basically, you can completely max out Fallout 4 on this card and never worry about dropping below the high 40s, and stepping down a level or 2 on the notoriously system-crippling God Rays option will have you stable and capped at 60 FPS pretty easily. One of my personal favourites, just Cause 3, utterly maxed out except for vignetting and motion blur, which I can't stand. It's a similar story. You'll rarely see anything below 60 FPS for more than a second or 2, and you're usually quite comfortably above that. 1440p maxed out only pulls the frame rates down slightly more, only diving to the mid-40s when you do something super intensive like blow up a petrol station. Outside of that, high 50s to low 60s make it a super pleasant experience to play. Now, 4K is where you start having to turn things down a bit, which is no surprise. I mean, even the best GTX 970 out there isn't the ideal choice for 4K gaming. We all know that. But even at middle-of-the-road settings, Just Cause 3 is still a very pretty game, and at 4K it does look enticingly crisp. But you guys know me, I'd rather more pretties than more pixels. Your personal preferences for that calculation may vary. The card will happily swallow GTA 5 at 1080p with all of the shiny things turned all the way up. And just like with Just Cause 3, asking it for 1440p doesn't do much to slow things down. And again, a familiar story, asking the GTX 970 for 4K worth of GTA 5 on screen will mean sacrificing a few of the fancier graphical tricks on offer. But for those of you wanting more pixels at the cost of fancier graphics, well, that's easily done without too many compromises here. And of course, it's worth mentioning that the 1440p and 4K examples here are only useful for frame rate comparisons, as this video is being published at 1080p to YouTube, so the scaling involved makes any visual comparison directly between them a little bit tricky. So do keep that in mind when you're leaving comments about how the games look from your perspective at that other end of the screen there. And finally, let's see how Star Wars Battlefront kicks the Galax around. And as always, for the sake of consistency, on the Tatooine survival map. 1080p utterly maxed out is a walk in the park, triple digits all day long, so those of you with overclocked 100Hz G-Sync monitors will be in happy joy land, and even the owners of lust-worthy 144Hz gaming screens won't be turning much down to get there. 1440p at ultra settings also proves to be little challenge here, at home in the mid-60s to 70s with ease. And if you want 4K, you'll be slipping back to medium settings, maybe even customizing that down a few more clicks, because 30 to 40 FPS is fine for survival stuff, but you'll risk a noticeable disadvantage in multiplayer without ramping up your frame rates to as smooth as 60 FPS plus. And of course, the artificial benchmarks tell similar stories of a GTX 970 performing at the top end of what can be expected from these wonderful cards. 1483 score from a 1080p maxed out heaven benchmark averaging just below 60 frames per second. Valley Extreme HD at 1080p jumps just above that at 61 frames per second and 2564 score. And under the good old Firestrike tests, you'll find the GTX 970 Black Hall of Fame Sniper Edition consistently outperforming a standard GTX 970 benchmark. 9,578 in standard, 5,154 in extreme, and 2,779 under ultra. But all of these were at the out-of-the-box overclocks. This card is specifically designed for overclocking, and with that in mind, meet the score I got once I put my serious face on and stuck the boot into this card. From an already above average 9,578 score, I whiffed straight past it for a score of 10,474 points. That's about another 9.4% if my math is correct. And again, for comparison on those numbers, a stock GTX 970 clock is 1380 MHz at its boost, and most high-end editions of the GTX 970 will overclock to about 1500 MHz boost without much work. And you can find reports of overclockers who really know what they're doing hitting the wall on the GTX 970s at about 1600 MHz. Many consider that to be pretty much the hard limit for the 970. Well, meet my overclock. And I'm far from an expert at this stuff, and yes, I'm using the Gigabyte OC software instead of Galax's own, mainly because I like the interface better. Galax is a bit, it's a bit clumsy, if I'm honest with you. But yeah, a full and absolutely stable, I might add, 1518 MHz base and 16,070 MHz overclock on the boost clock. That's mind-boggling! And hitting that button on the back of the card to fully unlock all power delivery, unlock the fans into 100%, did let me get even higher, but only slightly. Another 4 MHz also, actually, nothing that made any real difference in the real world. I even got a run at 1680 at one point, but it wasn't what you'd call stable. So that overcrank button on the back there will be of more use to those who want to custom liquid cool this card or even nitro cool this card to go for, yes, this is where the name comes from, 3D Mark Hall of Fame record scores. With the air cooler, you pretty much don't need it to max out your overclock, and aside from about the 15-degree temperature saving it'll give you from having the fans perma-maxed, all you're doing is making it louder, basically. Oh, and speaking of which, here's a little iPhone footage I got when I was doing my tests. That's the sound it makes under full maximum overclock and full load under a benchmark. It's redonks. I don't know about you, but you can clearly see how impressed I was by that. Oh, and it gets better than that even. You may be thinking that temperatures must be close to the 80-ish Celsius degree top end the Nvidia chips are rated for. Nope! Even with this monster overclock, and even with the fans at maybe a bit over half speed, you're still very comfortably below the problem zone for heat, at about 71-ish degrees. And that's all well and good in benchmarks and stuff, but what does an overclock like this do in the real world when you're actually playing games? Well, remember the 30 to 40 FPS we got in Star Wars at 4K with middle-of-the-road settings? Well, same settings here with the overclock in place and boom! Mid-50s, diving briefly into the 40s, and even spiking up to the 80s. Let's go back to the GTA 5. At 4K, it gets a similarly smoother ride. I was even able to turn a couple more graphic options up and still keep my frame rates at a pleasant place. And yes, of course, the same applies for Just Cause 3. If you want to push it to 4K, you'll find it much more playable with this lovely overclock in place. And again, best of all, it did all of this without getting any louder at all. Like the fans were literally no louder than the out-of-the-box overclock. But speaking of noise, there was some slight coil whine when you let things ramp up to the triple-digit frame rates, as there is with pretty much every card, unfortunately. But it was relatively quiet. I'll give you a listen. So yeah, not too bad, and with your case closed, you'll probably never even notice it. And just while we're on the subject of cases, I actually had to bend my case a bit to get the card to actually fit in, as it's a little bit wider than some cards are. Once it was in, it was okay, but I had to bend the case to sort of get it into the slot in the first place, if you know what I mean. This won't be an issue for most people. It's just my case, the Corsair Air 240, is unusually shallow, and I knew this when I bought the case. It also meant I couldn't get my side panel back on, as the width of the card also made the power cables protrude out too far. Once more, most cases will not have this issue, but it's wise to take a peek at the spec sheet for the measurements on any card you buy. And finally, for one, one last note on noise, let's have a listen to the fans. And like we saw earlier in the video, even at a max load, even at a max load on a benchmark load and overclock to the absolute stable limit, you heard it for yourself earlier, it stays pretty quiet, almost never needing to ramp up more than about 60% of fan speed to keep things around 70 degrees C or below. Happily, well under the recommended max of about 81 degrees for these chipsets. So, verdict. Well, it's not the smallest GTX 970 you'll find, it's not the lightest GTX 970 you'll find, it's not the most kind to your power supply needs, it's not the prettiest, and it's not the quietest, but oh, sweet tap-dancing pachyderms on a Sunday! It's way, way, way up there when it comes to being one of, if not the most powerful flavour of GTX 970 you can snatch up. I'll be honest with you, before now I had always assumed that the grand claims of branding their cards Hall of Fame editions and such was just blustering marketing on behalf of Galax. But damn, did they shut me up. Well, actually what they did was left my jaw slack and mouth agape, but you know, you get my point, it's just an idiom. The GALAX GTX 970 Black Hall of Fame Sniper Edition has literally, and I mean very literally, been custom made to push the GTX 970 chipset right to the ragged edge. It's a predator. It's a stealthy black-clad ninja with a grenade launcher. And it's very, very impressive. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty, and I will catch you next time.